If you're a founder of a coaching or consulting business who's tired of inconsistent months, inconsistent setters, and inconsistent results no matter how much content you pump out, then this video is going to shift the way that you run your business forever. Because what I'm about to show you is exactly why revenue keeps bouncing between your best month and your worst month, and how to exactly eliminate that roller coaster completely. Because most people are trying to scale by adding more leads, more content, more pressure. But the truth is, scaling is not about doing more. It's about becoming somebody different. And today, I'm going to show you the exact identity shift that your setters need to make in order to create 50K months as a baseline, your floor. It isn't a miracle, so let's dive in. And if you're new here, I'm DJ. I install dmthesetter systems for 6- and 7-figure coaching companies, specifically in the info space, and have helped founders turn unpredictable DM chaos into consistent $30,000, $50,000, even $100,000 plus months by raising the performance floor of their DM setting team. Everything I'm about to show you is what's actually working across multiple high-volume client accounts as of right now. Most founders have no idea that their DM team is built on sand. Your revenue isn't limited by effort, it's limited by identity. And until you raise your seller's floor, your best month will always be an accident. One of the biggest lessons I learned from Benjamin Hardy, the author of 10x is easier than 2x, is that a real goal isn't something that you try to achieve. A real goal is actually a constraint, a filter. It forces you to eliminate the 80% that doesn't matter and focus on the 20% that multiplies everything. And when you apply that towards your DM team, everything really becomes obvious. I'll show you it here in a second. Most founders obsess over their ceiling, their best week, their best setter, their best month. But Hardy teaches the opposite. Your life changes when you raise your minimum standard, aka your floor. And that is the funnel that we're going to look at here in a second when it comes to your DMs. It's not just a dashboard, it's not just a KPI, it's not just a math, it's actually an identity test. All right, so then let's dive into the dmthesetter funnel and how we specifically turn goals into KPIs that lead to monthly scaling by raising the floor. But before we do so, I want to show you how this system actually applied to a recent client of mine, which is Tara. Tara started with 0 DM setters in the month of August, and she was doing roughly $25,000 in a fitness offer with an app. She just launched her high ticket offer, but she didn't have a conversion mechanism with a large audience. Now, I want to say you don't need large audiences for this system to work. We installed the same system for Whitney, who had a $7,000 audience in the crypto space, and she still converted $40,000 in roughly 45 days from that account. So we started here in August. September 8th, she already made $12,500 from the ladies just by installing qualified talent. But of course, that is just the start. What we actually did is installing what I'll show you today, which led us to having her create a 49K month in just a matter of 60 to 90 days by raising her floor of 0 DM cash to $35,000 in DM cash, from which $35,000 was from the setters if we talk about that 96K month. Actually made a small typo here. So here are the goals broken down for DM sales teams and how you can turn, for example, 50K into new DM cash coming from 26K if you want to start to increase your floor. And so the first thing that we must understand is what DM setting is about and what we actually desire to track, and if you need to actually track data. And yes, you do, because the activities is the outbound, the follow-ups, and inbound. That is step number 1 inside the funnel. Step number 2 inside the funnel is your call proposal rate, which should be between 1 to 3% as a minimum baseline if you don't have that much inbound and you have to do outbound on a daily basis as well, which where it's 3 to 5% if you have a lot more inbound and, for example, a very strong brand. Now, if we then go through the book-through rate, it's what we want to have as a minimum standard of 30%. Industry average if you're in the info space, for example, a fitness offer, a biz up offer, etc. Then you want to have a certain show up rate, which I recommend being a bare minimum of 50%. And then, of course, certain close rate, minimum 20 to 30%. And then you have your average cash per call, cash collected on average per client. And those are some of the metrics that we're going to start to work with right now to help you understand how you can raise your floor effectively. But of course, in order for you to raise your floor, you must be aware of what your baseline numbers are. So first, we need to get previous data, or you need to start tracking it per today. You can literally go do that in an Excel sheet if you don't track this data, and start to track activity, call proposal rate, and the actual book to rate to make sure that you can make sure that you have your setter something to make improvements upon. So let's identify baseline numbers, and let's just act that these are the baseline numbers. So 5,000 activities per month, 208 per day, based on a 6-day work week for your setter. Call proposal rate of 1.32%, which leads to 66 booked calls. Then you have your book to rate of 37%, because that means that then 25 are actually landing up on the calendar based on 66 proposals. And then you have a 70% show up rate, which would mean you have 17% people actually show up to the sales call, and then from which 6 actually close at a 35% close rate, averaging a cash per call of 4,365, getting to a 26.1K month. So if this is your baseline, let's say that this were to be your baseline, then how do we make improvements upon here? And so there are a couple of options now. And the thing is that you have to pick the lowest hanging fruit, aka identify the 20% that actually moves the needle. There's 3 pieces that we can actually focus on here at this stage. We have our activity, we have our call proposal rate, and we have our book to rate. Then we have, of course, our show rate, our close rate, and our average cash per call as well. But just for the sake of the DM setter funnel, we would just pretend that that is part of the sales world, where show rate is a little bit in between, depending on the perspective that you have on this inside your business as well, and what the efforts are from the DM setters to increase the show rate, of course, as well. But I believe that is also inherently tied to how the setters actually perform that lead to higher show rates, apart from what closers normally do, which is reaching out to leads, making sure that they confirm, or pre-call VSLs and all of that other stuff. So let's take an example here. If we just to improve one metric, example improvisation 1, and we're going to focus on the actual book to rate. So let's say that your activity stays the same. And this is the beautiful thing about what I'll teach you guys today, is that even if you didn't add a single extra lead and you kept the activity completely the same, you can still make a lot more money by optimizing what you already have. So what does that tell you? The answer isn't to add more leads. The answer isn't to have better marketing. The answer isn't to have marketing, to do more content and produce more leads, etc. Literally, if you kept doing the exact same things, but we increased the floor of what our sellers actually produce within the acquisition conversion funnel, we get to make more money. And so call proposal rate stays the same, so it's still 1.32% or 66 calls proposed. Then if our book to rate goes to what we normally want to aim for, at least within the info space on B2C products, is that we want to have a 52% BTR, which would then lead into 33 calls actually on your calendar. Now, if your show rate here stays the same, just for the sake of simple math, you would have 23 calls instead of 17. You would close 8 instead of 6, which would mean that you would already make $10,000 extra just by focusing on a single metric here inside the funnel. And I know I make it sound easy, but I'll also explain how you can improve this metric here at the end of it, but stick with me for now. So what happens if you improve not the book to rate, that stays the same or lower, but we actually improve our call proposal rate? Well, still, if you had the same activity, but we would increase our call proposal rate from 1.32% to 2.13%, you can see a massive difference here, where we now have 107 calls instead of 66. And so if the book to rate even was a little bit lower, it would still come out with having more opportunity on the calendar. And then 25% show rate on that means that we would have 1 extra close in this scenario based on the numbers here above. Now, if we actually go ahead and put all of this together, this is where the magic actually happens, because this is what you would focus on in the first couple of weeks with your setters, to first improve this, or vice versa, or maybe we have an activity issue, we could focus on that as well. But what happens if you put all of these things together is that you're now really starting to scale, because the floor has been raised when it comes to their identity. I'll show you here in a minute what that looks like. So if the activity again stayed the same, but we now have our increased metrics of our floor raised of 2.13% instead of 1.32%, 52% instead of 33 or 37, we would really have a lot more calls offered, a lot of more calls actually on the calendar. And therefore, if the show rate, close rate, and average cash collection stayed the same per call, we would make a jump from literally $26,000 to $58,000 just by focusing on the DM setter alone. Again, notice how I'm not focusing on adding a single extra lead, what the quality of the leads is like, or that you need to throw out more content, more YouTube videos, etc. Why would you do that if the funnel or the foundation isn't actually optimized? You're also not going to build your house on sand and then try to kind of build a shed beneath it as well on the same shitty foundation if the house is already starting to sink. However, this is how a lot of business owners actually run their business. And so now that we really start to identify what we can potentially focus on again, which is either activity, call proposal rate, or book to rate, it leads us towards like wanting to set a goal. But before we set a goal, I want you to be clear on what a goal actually is. Because a goal is not something that you try to achieve, which I thought for the longest time. A goal is an outcome that forces you to focus and raise your floors, not your ceiling. It's not something that we strive towards. It's a goal for us to make it, to kind of like have it be as something that raises the floor and allows us to focus better on what the action items or the input should be to get towards that goal with a certain time frame. And so it forces us to eliminate 80% of the activities to remain with the 20% that actually scales our business, which is essentially the principle of 10x versus 2x by Benjamin Hardy. And how that translates towards the setters is that we can see that all of these metrics that we just tracked are tied to identity. The setter identity at activity level is their consistency and habits and clarity of their workflow. What do they do on a daily basis? That defines their numbers. Then if we identify the call proposal rate, that is tied to clarity and situational awareness, aka their actual skill level of how good they are at producing the result that you want, which is qualified calls on the calendar. So the identity is tied to what I call actually the buyer state of mind. And the buyer state of mind, I've explained this before, but I'm just going to pull it up here because it's so important to understand within the DM setting funnel is that your setters have to get people clear on the clarity phase. Where is your lead right now? Where do they want to go? And what is the gap between where they are right now and where they desire to be? Because if you get them clear on that, it starts to build conviction because you can plug and play your offer specifically in what they feel is required to eliminate that gap and get towards a desired outcome. And by now it's so customized, it starts to build the belief inside the lead where we rewire their mindset that lead to higher show-up rates and a lot more leads actually booking through versus the call proposal and not having that belief system. So to tie that back, if you have, for example, a lot of call proposals, then people are not booking through. It's actually that they aren't having the conviction or the belief, which means that the skill level of the setter is making sure that people exactly know what they're struggling with right now, what they desire to solve, and how your product is actually going to help them solve that to increase those numbers there specifically. Now, if we go to the show rate, it's the leadership and the priming. How do they get people toward those calls and do they believe that they can actually help them? Again, this also ties into the buyer state of mind. And then we have your setter identity at a close percentage. And even though your closer closes, by focusing on this, by the setter transferring the belief and certainty towards the lead, you will have your closers find that they have an easier time because the leads are so primed to perfection that they have a belief system of already wanting to make a change. So now it's just about the basic objections at the end of the call rather than people coming to your call that don't know what this is for, knowing that they already can't afford it, wondering what there is to afford and how this is going to tie into their life to fix what they desire to fix. We reduce all of that by focusing on these specific things. And so if we talk about data, what we looked at here, specifically, it's going to tie us back to where we are right now. And so the setter funnel, the activity and the outbound, inbound of follow-ups actually lead to patterns, which is again, their habits and their consistency. Their call proposals are going to lead to the proficiency that your setter has, which is skills and communication. And then your book to rate is actually tied to performance data and KPIs, which they hit. which then leads to qualified calls in your calendar, which equates to your profit or results in ROI that you have from your setter, not only by investing the time and energy, but of course also other resources like base space, etc., to make sure that your business is ultimately going to scale. Now, how does this tie back to goals? If you identify, for example, that your call proposal rate is too low, then you need to focus on what is their actual skill level and how do they make sure that they have this in order for leads. Do they understand the ICP? Do they understand the offer? Do they know what the leads are actually struggling with? I literally tell this to the business owners that I work with. If you were to go inside your inbox right now, do you believe you could book 2 to 3 calls if you had to, absolutely had to today? Almost always the answer is yes. And so if you know that you can do it, then what is the gap that setter is missing to make sure that they can produce the same result? And that lies somewhere in between the clarity phase. Now, if you have people that book calls and they actually, propose calls, if your setter proposes calls, but the lead isn't actually booking in, we have a conviction issue. The lead doesn't believe that your offer or what you help them do isn't going to actually solve the problem. And so that's where you have to focus on how do we present that? How do we do that specifically? It's also where they can make like too much offers inside the clarity phase, which hyperinflates what we actually see here, which isn't true. If you really look at like how that conversation would then be going, the realistic thing could be that they are actually at 1.32%, because once they wanted to get towards that 2.13%, it literally means that they just try to propose more, but not actually fix the skill issue at hand. That also builds a better belief system where you can see the book to rate going up. Rarely does call proposal rate go up alone and the book to rate stays the same. You could have that you can literally not make more proposed calls based on the lead quality and influx that you have, where the call proposal rate stays the same, but then the conviction can be improved and you can still have a higher book to rate, for example. And this all comes back to you on how you actually lead your setters and what you basically teach them in relation to where they are and how you would normally book calls. It's a matter of leadership. So this is Benjamin Hardy's point. The real goal isn't $50,000. The real goal is the identity of the person who makes $50,000 inevitable. You don't chase the number. You build the person who produces that number as their baseline. You eliminate the 80% of wasted motion. You really harden the 20% that drives revenue, and suddenly your entire business is going to actually shift upwards. So here's the identity of a future self-setter. I'm somebody who creates conversations, not waits for them. I'm somebody who finds clarity inside every reply. I am somebody who leads, not chases. I am somebody who primes people to actually show up. I am someone who transfers conviction and not scripts. And I'm somebody that holds a perfect floor that guarantees revenue. Because if you were to literally say these things to yourself, you are those things, you embody those things. And your goal as a leader is to transfer this towards your team. Because when your setter becomes that person, $50,000 months stop being goals and they become the minimum. That's identity. It's not tied to motivation. As a founder, your job isn't to push your setters harder. Your job is to shape the identity they operate from. Raise the floor. Choose the constraints, force clarity and focus. The ceiling will then raise itself. Now, if you want to implement this inside your business and actually increase your floor, then send me the word floor in a DM on Instagram at djthesetter, and let's explore what working together could look like. It's also in the description below. Again, at djthesetter, send me the word floor and we can explore what working together would look like.